Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Pittsburgh. I am Reverend Dr. Kadar Walker, and I am truly honored to serve as the minister of this wonderful community. It is Sunday, January 16th of 2022. And we are so glad that you have chosen to be with us this morning, whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are from, you are welcome here. Whatever reason you woke up this morning, grabbed your cup of caffeine, clicked on that YouTube link, and you decided to join us. We are delighted that you have, if you are brand new or a long-time visitor. I also welcome our few guests that we have with us this morning in the sanctuary. What a delight to see some faces. We are a community dedicated to welcoming the stranger and working for justice wherever the heavy weight of oppression has dug into the fabric of our lives. And I am live here in our sanctuary this morning, but I am never alone. I have a group of fabulous collection of talented people. Our liturgist today is Kathy Fine. On music, you've already heard the incredible gifts and talent of Ellen Goshen, who's director of instrumental music. Our story for all and our hymn leader today is Erica Shadowsong. Technical support is Paul Cunningham and Will Snavely. And we have all of you as well. On behalf of this whole team, thank you. Thank you for being here this morning. And now, if this is your first time with us, we would love to hear from you and make connections with you, and you haven't already done so. Please check out our website, firstunitarianpgh.org, probably best if you Google it. When you find our website, down at the bottom, you'll find a place where you can fill out a little form, and you get on our newsletter list, and you can start finding out about all the activities that we offer to this community. And if after this service you would like to join us for social hour on Zoom, please just send us an email to First Unitarian Pittsburgh, that's all one word, firstunitarianpittsburgh@gmail.com, and you'll get an auto response with the Zoom link. I also want to announce that this afternoon from 1 to 2:15 on Zoom, we're going to have a congregational conversation about the proposed 8th principle to the Unitarian Universalists. And that is today's topic, is what is that principle about and how do we engage in a conversation about it? Look to your email for that Zoom link. And this is primarily for our members and friends of this community. So I invite you now to take a deep breath and arrive in body and spirit. Prepare yourself mentally and physically for this spiritual experience of community worship, however that means to you. Deep breath, let your thoughts settle down, let your energy get grounded and arrive. Arrive in body and spirit. Picture yourself connected to all those who are watching, also at this time and perhaps in the future. We are together in community. We turn now to our chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. May the light of this beautiful symbol inspire within you the search for truth, the creation of justice, the work of courage, and a commitment to the spiritual practice that grounds us as we engage in the difficult work of dismantling racism and creating a world of justice for all. Welcome. Welcome to you all.
Come and go Harper bends the arc. Sometimes freedom is a long time coming. It may take generations upon generations for justice to be won. Our Unitarian ancestor, Reverend Theodore Parker, said, "I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. From what I see, I am sure it bends toward justice." The Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. often used this quote. Barack Obama, 44th and first African-American president of the United States, added, "But here is the thing, it does not bend on its own. It bends because each of us in our own ways puts our hand on that arc and we bend it in the direction of justice." The hands of Unitarian Universalists have been bending the arc for many years. You may have heard of John Adams, Susan B. Anthony, Christopher Reeve, or Rachel Carson. Have you heard of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper? Her hand was on the arc too. Harper was born a free Black woman in Baltimore, Maryland in 1825. She was raised in the household of her uncle, an educator and African Methodist Episcopal minister. He was also an abolitionist, a person who objected to the enslavement of Blacks. Harper followed in her uncle's footsteps to become an educator and an abolitionist. She also became a writer, publishing her first book of poetry at 20 and publishing the first short story by an African-American woman later in her life. Her writing often urged Blacks, women, and people in oppressed groups to take a firm stand for equality. In 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act was passed. It became dangerous to be a free Black in Maryland because slave owners could claim Black people were runaway slaves and force them into slavery. So Harper moved farther north to Ohio and then to Philadelphia. She taught, ran part of the Underground Railroad, and lectured around the country to bend the arc toward justice for African Americans. In 1863, abolitionists celebrated success with the passage of the Emancipation Proclamation. It did not immediately create a world where African Americans were treated equally and fairly, but it did make slavery illegal. Harper saw that there was still work to be done. She put her hand toward women's civil rights, in particular the rights of Black women and the right of all women to vote. She co-founded the National Association of Colored Women. Again, she toured and lectured on the topic of freedom. Her lectures and writings spoke to the need for women to be free, to be more than wives and mothers. She understood what she was talking about. A mother herself, after her husband died, Frances Harper took her daughter with her on her lecture tours. During her justice work, Harper met many Unitarians also working to bend the arc. She felt at home with our liberal religious beliefs and knew that her work could strengthen the justice work of the Unitarians. She joined hands with them by joining the first Unitarian church in Philadelphia in 1870. She frequently read her poetry from the pulpit at this church, yet she kept her membership and taught Sunday school at an AME church too. Harper died in 1911, before the 19th Amendment gave women the right to vote in 1919. This was a cause she worked hard to bring about. Yet Harper understood that her labors might bring about freedoms she would never enjoy. She said, "Apparent failure may hold in its rough shell the germs of a success that will blossom in time and bear fruit throughout eternity." Some of the fruits of Harper's labor and the labor of other Unitarian Universalists are enjoyed by us today. Yet we are not done. Oppression still exists in our world. Harper's hands and Parker's and Adams, Anthony's, Reeves, and Carson's are no longer on the arc. Our hands are needed to take their place. May the bending continue until the victory is won.
Our religious community is made up of volunteers and staff, creating and hosting a variety of programming, even as we stay safe during this time of pandemic. We rely on your financial support. Please take time to reflect on your ability to financially support this community. Donations by check may be mailed to the church office. Electronic donations can be made online through the church website or by texting GIVE to 412-435-1050 and following the instructions.
I invite you to bring your hearts together as we think about all of us who are carrying joys and sorrows, often silent in the sanctuary of our hearts. Too often, we exist in a world right now where we feel so isolated, and it's hard to find moments of true celebration or to express our deep sorrows. And I hope you remember to reach out in whatever way you can while keeping yourself safe and connected. for all those joys and sorrows that remain silent. Know that we were with you, if not in body, but in spirit. Please join me for a few moments of silent meditation and prayer. Blessed Spirit of life and love, hold us in your embrace. Hold us in your embrace of soothing, comforting. Hold us in your embrace of energy and resilience and strength. Great Spirit of love, feed our yearning for justice. Great Spirit of love and compassion, remind us of all those who suffer from oppression and fear. In particular, we hold in our hearts today all of our Jewish siblings who went through such terror yesterday as when some of their own in Fort Worth, Dallas area were held hostage. So many of our Jewish siblings walk from moment to moment with fear in their hearts. We hold in particular all those who are ill or in the hospital, whether with COVID or for whatever reason in this time of pandemic, that it can make things so much more extreme and fearful. Spirit of compassion, soothe our anxieties, remind us to breathe deeply and ground our feet on this earth. Give us the courage to speak words of love and truth without anger that is biting and tearing down. Give us the wisdom to see a vision on the horizon that we can be participants in bending the arc toward justice. Great Spirit of love, the Spirit of the holy, the Spirit of God by all the names that we have known throughout the ages, hold us, embrace us, and guide us in our journey. Blessed be, and amen. invite you to take out your order of service wherever you are, responsive reading, and join in the response marked C for congregation. This is Unitarian Universalist Principles and Disability by Michael Baseley. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person.
Worth takes endless forms. As we find more expressions of our worth, we grow richer as a church community.
We believe in justice, equity, and compassion in human relations.
If we let rationalizations replace justice, resignation replace equity, or pity replace compassion, our human relations are diminished.
We believe in the acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregation.
How do I withhold acceptance? Do my fears stunt our congregation's growth? When next I hesitate, can I extend my hand instead?
We believe in a free and responsible search for truth and meaning.
How much more will we learn if we share our search with travelers who set a different pace, see from a different perspective, or understand with different wisdom?
We believe in the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within the congregation and in society at large.
For all to have a voice, we need many ways of expression, and we need many ways to listen.
We believe in the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all.
Just as peace means no violence, and liberty means no oppression, and justice means no prejudice, all means no exceptions.
And we believe in respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part.
We gain strength from the support of others, and we grow stronger as we support others. Together we can weave our values into an ever stronger web of existence.
This has been really lovely to put this service together with Erica and Ellen and Kathy, and I hope you've enjoyed the hymns and the one we're going to sing at the end. These are Black spirituals that come from a particular time in our history, a culture in our history that I think is sometimes hard for white people to relate to. To remember that, yes, these were used during the civil rights era, but they come from a time of terror. Black spirituals come from a time of slavery, and they bear deep and important messages. This service is about dismantling, tearing down, and reinventing in order to create the beloved community that our Black spirituals are calling out for. For our visitors today and for our people of color, I invite you to bear witness. Perhaps bring your own wisdom. Perhaps learn and feel inspired and compassion. And you may find yourself passing judgment as well. But I am today primarily addressing our white Unitarian Universalist members and our friends here at First Unitarian Church of Pittsburgh. But I ask all of you to expend me some trust and helping carrying you and holding this space as we broach a very challenging and conflicting, persistent topic of systemic racism. This is a service about reckoning, responsibility, accountability for perhaps the biggest sin borne by humanity, the systemic oppression of fellow human beings because of color. Color born with, inherited with, along with the pain and ancestral harm of trauma. It's a service about privileged patterns and habits that have been long established and embedded in cultures of power and authority, again, based on color. It's a service about pain and suffering and angst and terror and devastation. It's a service about denial, minimizing, intellectualizing, white drama, lots of white drama and power, and lots of power. It's a service also with an invitation to fully live, an invitation to live into our theology, our Unitarian Universalist theology, and to proclaim it, to believe in it, to live it daily, wildly, profusely, for all the world to see and hear. It's a service we're invited to strengthen our covenants that bind us one another here and now, as well as to our ancestors in the past and our future generations. It's a service about feelings, about emotions, about allowing our hearts to open up with expressions of how we are experiencing life. And it's about healing. It's an invitation to listen deeply, humbly, sincerely, with the openness to possibility and transformation. It's a service about empowerment, not guilt or despair. It's a service about action, reaction, and proaction. It's a service about bending the arc of justice, about creating small ripples into the faithful future. It's a service about what guides us in word and deed. What words are put to form and how do they function in our life? But more emphatically, this is a service about dismantling white supremacy and racism, and what we as Unitarian Universalists are willing to do and are willing to risk. It sounds dramatic, but I absolutely believe what's at stake is the future of our faith, the future of Unitarian Universalism. It's about what we are willing to proclaim to the world. We begin with our principles. We understand a principle. It's important that we start on the same fundamental understanding of what a principle it is, but it's a truth. It's a fundamental truth or a proposition that serves as the foundation of a system of belief or behavior. It's an understanding, an agreement. Unitarian Universalists, we are a non-creedal faith. We do not have a statement or dogma, but we are bound by 7 principles as a fundamental truth, an understanding that feeds our behavior and our word and deed. And we heard those 7 principles in our responsive reading just a few moments ago, and these principles have evolved over time, slowly, as we have searched for truth. At first, we weren't really conscious about these principles. They were swimming around in our words and deeds. They weren't driven by any particular one person or a group at first, but they slowly took form. In 1960 and 1961, when the Unitarians and the Universalists merged into one association. And the first set of principles were placed in our bylaws as our new Unitarian Universalist Association. And the principles sat there, largely unchanged, until some grumbling and some major energy shift happened in the early 1980s. And then it built up to a loud and rather thunderous call for change. The women stood up and they claimed their voice, primarily for the Unitarian Universalist Women's Federation. They were tired of the blatantly sexist language in the principles and our bylaws, well, and everywhere else. But by 1984, commissions had gathered and committees had talked and votes were taken, and 6 principles were brought before our National Assembly, what we call General Assembly, our annual denominational meeting, and they took the first of 2 votes. A year later, 1985, with the addition of a 7th principle, near unanimity took place, which is rare with us, and the 7th principles were adapted and put back into the bylaws under Article 2. The principles were then featured in the front of our gray hymnal. Children's version was created, songs were created, they've been painted on walls, they've been hung on banners, they've been printed in bookmarks and pamphlets, they've been plastered all over websites and t-shirts, and curriculum and books have been published offering readings and reflections and sermons about the principles. But despite all these quasi-permanent places, the words are part of a living tradition. They're not static. They're not forever. That's why I chose that particular responsive reading, because we're always in dialogue with those principles. The search for truth does not simply end. And throughout this time, from the 1960s on, there's been a lot of conversation about what we call creeping creedalism, making sure they don't turn into some sort of a creed or dogma. It's important to remind ourselves that those 7 principles, as we know them today, they emerged out of a need for healing that has yet to fully unfold. And we know that they need to be revisited. So the Unitarian Universalist bylaws also require that Article 2 be reviewed, not less than every 15 years. We are in a time of renewal right now and revision. The first report was issued this past year in 2021 at General Assembly. There'll be another report from that commission at this year's General Assembly being held in Portland, Oregon. And they'll be brought for the first of 2 votes in 2023 when General Assembly is held right here in Pittsburgh, for a final vote in 2024. I am pretty confident those proposals are going to ask us to change the wording and our actions in response. And we have, coming up from the bottom up, not the top down, not part of the commission, we have a proposed 8th principle to those 7 principles. And it is very intentionally being designed to come from the bottom up. The 8th principle that's being proposed is different type of wording. It's a different style of writing, yet it comes from a similar place as we had in the 1980s. It's a need for healing. It's a need for change. The wording in the 1980s was offered by women. The 8th principle is being offered by people of color, notably Unitarian Universalist people of color, and we need to listen. You can find out more information about the 8th principle on the website 8thprincipleuu.org. That's the number 8th principle, uu.org, but I'm going to read it to you here. There's the preamble for all of our principles, which states, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, and here's the proposed language, journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that are accountable countably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. I'm going to read that again. Journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community, by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. For the last 3 years, Unitarian Universalist congregations have been invited to talk about, reflect, and then vote on adding the 8th principle before a General Assembly vote. And that vote hasn't been set. It hasn't been set. I suspect it'll come up in 2024 when the final new revised version of the principles will come up. And I want you to know that there have been a few, not many, a few very strong dissenters within Unitarian Universalist churches. And they are engaged in a reactivity and angry, and they've been protesting. And they're protesting mostly about dismantling white supremacy. And they are causing considerable conflict and pain for our people of color and our members. So it's important to ask right now, why vote yes? Do we need such a statement in our 7 principles? Surely the other principles address racism and oppression. Perhaps. It can easily be argued that implicitly, yes, the inherent worth and dignity is about treating each and every person complete with equality. All of that can be argued, but yet, here's the thing, yet racist hatred and oppression persist. Here's something to consider. In the book Widening the Circle of Concern, which was a report by the Unitarian Universalist Association's Commission on Institutional Change, it came out about 3 years ago. In that book, their surveys and their studies and their interviews showed that the vast majority of people of color and other marginalized identities within our circles of concern have experienced discriminatory and oppressive incidents on their culture and race. Our beloved Unitarian Universalist people of color and people with marginalized identities, they're hurting. Even within our own best intentions, they are hurting. Despite being a leading liberal religious community dedicated to 200 years of justice work and proclaiming our commitment to being a counter-oppressive, anti-racist institutions, we have significant racial divide and power imbalance in our homes, in our sanctuaries, in our association. Consider this, a testimony, a person of color that was written about in this book, Widening the Circle of Concern. This person is called Mallory. Mallory said a few years ago they met some Unitarian Universalists at a Black Lives Matter rally. Hadn't heard of the faith and really liked the conversations. And they were from another city, so Mallory found their own Unitarian Universalist congregation near where they lived and started attending. And then became a member and then joined a book club. What Mallory noticed was that every time in the book club they were talking about racism and oppression or difficult issues around culture, they would all look at Mallory as if Mallory had all the answers as the resident person of color. Mallory is Indian. And Mallory is also queer. So Mallory was really quite surprised when Mallory approached the chair of the LGBTQI, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer committee and said, maybe we should add pronouns to our name tag so people know how we self-identify, says Mallory, who identifies as they. And that chairperson dismissed it immediately. And then Mallory, barely 2 months after joining this church, was asked by the minister to join the board. 2 months. Mallory thought that was pretty soon and early, but wanted to make a difference and have their voice heard. But then in 2017, when all Unitarian Universalist congregations were invited to join in what we called a teach-in, all on the same Sunday, over 3/4 of our denominations engaged in this teach-in about dismantling white supremacy, about becoming a counter-oppressive institute. Mallory's church did engage, but when Mallory took it to the board to say, what's next? What's next? There were lots of recommendations. That was just the beginning. The board put the conversation down the line. No, not now. Wrong time. Next fall. No, not now. Next winter. No, we're having a change in leadership. And every time Mallory brought it up, the minister and the board said, now is not the time. Mallory finished their board term and eventually left. Their voice no longer heard, and the commitment to being counter-oppressive, anti-racist institution no longer true. And Mallory's heart was broken. Consider my own experience at one of my former congregations where a well-intentioned member of my community who loved to welcome people into the church welcomed one day a brand new first ever person of color, a black woman, walking into the church. And my member said, "We need more people like you." I was horrified. I understood her good intentions, but the impact was to designate this person as coming in with their skin first. Heartbreaking. We never saw the visitor again. How do we white people break down these barriers within ourselves, our assumptions, our biases? How do we break down and cross these divisions of segregation? Not with guilt, not with shame. They're not helpful. They just are further barriers. We better ask, how do we shift the hurt in our own hearts, lower our own defenses? How do we shift the power? How do we invite intimacy? How do we turn fear of conflict into transformative conflict, where we can perhaps meet face to face? And this is so important. How do we resist intellectualizing racism? This is one of the things we like to read about it and talk about, theory of racism. But we rarely practice intimate conversations, face to face. I remember my first kiss. I was in the 8th grade. Nathan Bishop Middle School in Providence, Rhode Island. His name was James Pope. He was president of the student body. I was vice president. He was black and I was white. Still am. We lived in adjacent neighborhoods. He lived on Camp Street, filled with black and poor families. Constant reports of crimes and drugs. I lived in a neighborhood right next door in a duplex with a mixed ethnic class, multi-religious neighborhood. I tried to avoid Camp Street, not always possible. 2 years after that kiss, I had my purse snatched in that neighborhood as I was walking into a store, and that made me more fearful. But in that kiss, when I was in the 8th grade, in that moment by the lockers, I remember it so well. It was after school had let out. An exchange had happened. Momentarily, our worlds converged and our barriers broke down across race and class and the privilege that I lived with. We met. He grew up a black boy surrounded by crime and the cycle of poverty. I also grew up poor with food stamps, both of our worlds, with food stamps and single parents, drugs and crimes. They were in my neighborhood as well, but I was protected by our personal security system, 2 collies. If you know collies, they're hysterical barkers. But more importantly, I grew up on the edge between worlds, with doorways of escape that were open to me and my privileged white skin. I knew I was going to college, but that was never really an option for James Pope. I heard later that he had gotten in trouble with the law and ended up in prison. I don't know if he even graduated from high school. I left that neighborhood for college and grad school with my white identity firmly in place. And I look back at him now, almost 45 years later, and I see a young boy across race and class and culture and history. I can only visit that neighborhood, but it's like crossing into a different country. I can't truly understand the psychology of what it is for a young black male and what he's learning about his own body and all those barriers that are between us. He was taught that his body was a threat to others. He was taught again and again that he was dangerous. I had another encounter on Camp Street when I got a phone call one day. I was told by a young voice that they had found my purse in a park across the street from her house, and I went and picked up my purse, and a young black girl, 2 years younger than me, handed me my purse, and in that moment we looked at each other across the boundaries, and we found compassion in one another. I found gratitude. She called out to me in that moment with her act of graciousness. Across our worlds we met. This is a complex world, her world and mine, but her world cannot simply be dismissed and given up or avoided. At core, this young lady and James Pope and I, we all developed differently, but we're still coming together in the common human experience. If we want to understand the protesters on American streets, if we want to understand rioting and anger, and if we want to understand and dismantle these barriers, we have to look at who has all the power. We have to understand what it is to grow up in a foreign country in our own streets. We have to start listening, risking, offering compassion and grace and humility across the generations and see the suffering, the devastation, and then we have to name it and do it again and again and again, where we can bind one another together with our wounds, heart to heart, life to life. And we white people cannot get stuck on our guilt and our shame and our anger and our minimizing or our fear. It's really no longer appropriate to center our emotional white needs when we're doing counter-oppression work. So we pause. We, being we white folks, we pause, we breathe, and we ask what we can do to repair this world. How can we meet in intimacy? Our third principle invites us into spiritual growth, to engage in spiritual practices, perhaps, to stay grounded, breathing, meditation, prayer, heightening awareness of our emotions, finding ways to articulate them and be fully present. Our sixth principle is a call toward the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, for all. It's asking us to do something, to do the right thing. We need to do the right thing again and again and again. It doesn't happen just once. Martin Luther King was quoted with beautifully, "Never, never be afraid to do what's right, especially if the well-being of a person or animal is at stake. Society's punishments are small compared to the wounds we inflict on our souls when we look the other way." Care for our soul. The proposed eighth principle asks us to do the right thing. It is to care for our soul. And it is different from the other. It's asking to hold ourselves accountable. It's not just lofty, aspirational, theoretical words. It's asking us to face the reality of racism. I offer the words again from the eighth principle, the proposed language. Journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. Don't get caught up in the grammar or wording. It's proposed language. It's likely going to change by 2024. It's the call to action that challenges us, not where the comma goes. And don't think it's one vote. It's not. It's just a call to action. The vote is only the beginning of creating that which we yearn for and are dreaming. And when I say our faith is on risk, our faith, the future of Unitarian Universalism, remember, denominations, including our own, are losing members right now. Retaining members, attracting new members, particularly young families. Every indicator of the younger generations is that the values are about doing counter-oppressive work. And the eighth principle will proclaim to them who we are. The demographics of our country are changing fundamentally. And we need to make sure we're out there in this world proclaiming that we are a faith of collective liberation. The future of our faith is at stake, folks. If we're going to create a gorgeous, stunning, multiracial, multicultural, independent web of existence. I'm going to give you another quote from Martin Luther King, 1966. He was talking about in a speech on the revolution of race and equity. The great question is, what do we do when we find ourselves in such a period? Certainly the church has a great responsibility, because when the church is true to its nature, it stands as a moral guardian of the community and of society. It has always been the role of the church to broaden horizons, to challenge the status quo, and to question and break moors if necessary. I'm sure that we all agree that the church has a major role to play in this period of social change. Martin Luther King said that in 1966, and I want you to know who that audience was. Who was Martin Luther King standing in front of? Unitarian Universalists. That was spoken at a speech at our General Assembly, a room filled with Unitarian Universalists. He knew who he was speaking with. He knows who Theodore Parker is. He knows who Francis Moore Harper is. We are the church, my people. We are the church, and Martin Luther King is still calling us to action. So here's my action step, my beloved members of this church. We already have a group of dedicated lay leaders who are ready to carry on this conversation here at First Unitarian Church of Pittsburgh. And they are inviting you, I am inviting you into a conversation about the eighth principle. Over the next few months, we're going to reflect and listen and share stories and read some more and listen, particularly from people of color, Unitarian Universalist people of color. And then we're going to eventually vote when we're ready. I don't know when that's going to be. We'll know when we're ready. But we're going to vote before, I hope, it goes to the General Assembly in 2024. As of November of 2021, this past November, 130 Unitarian Universalist congregations have voted yes. Add the eighth principle. So I invite you to join the conversation, dialogue, show up, be ready to dismantle, rebuild, more than anything, be ready to bend the arc of justice. Amen, amen, and blessed be.
got to do when the Spirit says do. You've got to do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you got to do, oh Lord. Got to do when the Spirit says do. 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 Got to sing when the Spirit says sing. You've got to sing when the Spirit says sing. When the Spirit says sing, you've got to sing, oh Lord. You've got to sing when the Spirit says sing. 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 Got to dance when the Spirit says dance. You've got to dance when the Spirit says dance. You've got to, Spirit says dance. You've got to dance, oh Lord. You've got to dance when the Spirit says dance. 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 You've got to laugh when the Spirit says laugh. You've got to laugh when the Spirit says laugh. When the Spirit says laugh, you've got to laugh, oh Lord. You've got to laugh when the Spirit says laugh. 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 You've got to shout when the Spirit says shout. You've got to shout when the Spirit says shout. When the Spirit says shout, you've got to shout, oh Lord. You've got to laugh and shout. Spirit says 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 shout. You've got to do when the Spirit says do. You've got to do when the Spirit says do. When the Spirit says do, you've got to do, oh Lord. You've got to do when the Spirit says do. 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 Spirit says do.
We invite you to bring your voices together wherever you may be. As we extinguish our chalice, the words are found in the order of service, and these words are shared by Unitarian Universalists all across the country on Sunday mornings. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. My friends, go forth into this world knowing you are being called to do something. You are being called to engage in the courageous act of counter-oppression work, of dismantling white supremacy, of facing down racism, with our faith guiding us again and again. Return with love, my beloved. Return with love.